Well, folks, the 2028 presidential election may be 3.5 years away, but Republicans and Democrats alike are laying the groundwork for a 2028 run. Democrats are trying to figure out who are they going to nominate to try and be president in 2028. Well, Republicans want to know who can they nominate, who will be the successor to Donald Trump. As we all know, President Trump cannot run for re-election in 2028. He's expressed interest, and we've talked about this a lot of different times on here. Trump is a master troll. We know this guy knows how to troll like there's no tomorrow. Let's take it for what it is. The Constitution specifically does not allow President Trump to run in 2028 unless the Constitution's amended. That are the rules as of right now. But today we are going to be talking about the top 4 Republicans who could be president in 2028, replacing Donald Trump in the 2028 election. Who is going to lead the party forward? And so we are going to start off right off the bat. Probably the easiest one, or one of the easiest ones to start off with, is going to be J.D. Vance. Obviously, we know J.D. Vance is the current vice president of the United States and was a former senator from Ohio. He was elected back in 2022, beaten out at that time. He was a representative from the state, Tim Ryan, won the state by about 6 percentage points. Obviously, he was then picked to be Donald Trump's vice president in the 2024 election, and then he was replaced by Lieutenant Governor at the time, John Husted, who is now the senator and will have to run for re-election or a special election in 2026. Now, J.D. Vance went to Yale Law School, and he served in the U.S. Marine Corps, and I believe he served in Iraq. He went into, he was a corporate lawyer, he worked with Peter Thiel, did a lot of different things in the private sector, and even wrote his own book called Hillbilly Elegy, really detailing his upbringing in a working class family. Now, J.D. Vance's political views really center around a couple different things. The GOP's platform revolves so much around immigration right now and cultural conservatism. Cultural conservatism, and for J.D. Vance, I'd say economic nationalism. It has to do a lot, and this is where I kind of disagree with J.D. Vance. I think he's much more of a protectionist. Like we said, economic nationalism. He's much more of a protectionist than I would like someone to be as my president. No doubt about that. Ultimately, I think we should be using tariffs as leverage. We should be focusing on free trade, though. We should not be, only looking out for the U.S. interests. Obviously, it's our goal to look out for our own interests first. America first, not America alone. At the end of the day, we have to have free trade with other countries. Now, that doesn't mean that it needs to be unfair trade, because you can have free trade and it's unfair. There's no doubt about that. You just look at the United States right now. How many countries bar American products through import taxes, VAT taxes, other regulations, any non-tariff barriers? How many other countries keep American products out of their marketplace simply through regulations, which is just not okay? That's unfair. We may have free trade on everything else, but if they're restricting our products from reaching their market, that is just not okay at all, and we need to use tariffs as leverage. And so I think he would be very, very well when it came to immigration and really the more cultural conservatism, and social conservative values and beliefs. And I think a big one has to do with the family structure. You have a nuclear family. The nuclear family is the bedrock of our country. It's the bedrock of Western civilization. And we know that J.D. Vance is a strong supporter of President Donald Trump and his policies, and he appeals heavily to the same base that President Trump appeals to. Now, the big question would be, in 2028, would J.D. Vance be able to pull a lot of those low-propensity voters, those voters who came out, voted for Trump in 2024? Would he be able to drive those voters out to the polls in the same numbers that Trump did? We know that is how Trump won the 2024 election. The big one had to do with low propensity voters. You can talk about a lot of other factors, but low propensity voters is what pushed him over the line at the end of the day. And the big question, and the GOP is going to have to grapple with this moving forward, how can they deal with that? How can they get low propensity voters out to the polls post Donald Trump? And of course, we know from a speaking style, J.D. Vance is probably one of the most articulate Republicans or conservatives in America right now. He has some of the most articulate defenses of the conservative values, conservative policies, conservative issues, and critiques of elite institutions. He is very, very well spoken. I hate to say it, but I'll be honest with you. I was not bucking for J.D. Vance to be the vice presidential nominee. But as soon as he got that presidential nominee or nomination, we really took a hard look at his policies, at how he spoke, and we loved him. We love this guy. Look, there's some policies I disagree with on foreign policy and trade, absolutely. Same thing with Trump. There's some things you disagree with him on. But at the end of the day, J.D. Vance is one of the most articulate conservatives in America. And he resonates with the working class voters. You know, he emphasizes his economic and cultural issues, and that resonates with working class Americans. You know, if you're looking at a map here, a 2028 map, where are you going to have to win in 28? Okay, you're probably the same swing states you had to deal with in 2024. How can you relate with the working class voters in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in North Carolina, Georgia? You know, Pennsylvania and Michigan, these are a lot of white working class voters here. Lots of them. He needs that. If he wants to win, you got to win, at least in 28, you got to win Michigan and Pennsylvania. You know, and he quickly ascended from, you know, in the political realm, he quickly ascended. It's like Hillbilly Elegy only came out, 10 years ago? He went from being a venture capitalist to a senator to the vice president of the United States in a really short 10 years. Very, very short 10 years. And this guy is so effective. The way he effectively uses his media appearances to communicate his message, he has a lot of those same, it's the armor that he has. He is willing to go into the lion's den. He's going to go into these very liberal talk show hosts, these very liberal TV shows, pundits, and he's going to have a conversation with them. And he's not going to get mad. He's not going to bully them. He's not going to call them names. He's going to very articulately pick their argument apart. And he does it on live television, and he is great at it. It is almost fun to watch it. As anyone who likes to see that sort of stuff happen, those types of debates, it is very, very intriguing to watch it happen. But granted, J.D. Vance is still relatively new to politics, and he had a very brief tenure in the Senate, and then became vice president. Like, it was boom, 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 and he was vice president. And his really strong alignment with Trump, it could alienate some voters, some more moderate voters, but at the end of the day, if you can drive out those low propensity voters, you don't need to court as many of those independents and moderates as you maybe typically need to. But if you can't drive out the low propensity voters, you got to get the vote somewhere. So it really is just going to depend how much of the low propensity vote share are they able to drive out in 2028. And I really think we just need to know more. I think for me to make a decision for 2028, I need to know more when it comes to his economic policies and his foreign policy with J.D. Vance. I need to know more, especially post that Signal group chat leak. There were some things that Vance was saying in there that I really didn't agree with. And I would just like to know a little bit more about his foreign policy. But ultimately, Vance is well positioned to run in 2028 for the presidency. He closely ascended with President Trump and is a strong appeal to the conservative base, really making him a formidable candidate in the 2020 election. Now, ultimately, there's a number of other good candidates who could appeal to those same groups of people and maybe even broaden the electorate. But ultimately, he's the vice president right now. His ticket is basically punched that he's going to be leading the ticket. Everything else aside. And you see opinion polling right now. Vance is up by 25 percentage points in 2024 or 2028. Now, granted, I think if you take some of these polls out or you readjust for, Donald Trump Jr.'s pulling 11, 31, 17, 21% in some of these polls. At the same time, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s pulling some in here. It's like, and maybe even like, if you really narrowed it down to just a couple, I'd really like to see how that broke up. But ultimately, he's receiving about 1 in 4 or 4 in 10 voters in the Republican primary would vote for him. Now, moving on to our next candidate, Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is our number 2 candidate who could be president in 2028. Now, he is the current governor of Florida. He was elected back in 2019, elected by a very, very slim margin, won by, I don't even think it was a full percentage point. He won by not even half a percentage point over Andrew Gillum, went on into 2022 and won a massive victory in the state of Florida, winning by almost 20 points in the state. A huge victory for the Republican Party. And we know Florida had been shifting to the right for some time. Since like 1999, 2000, 2001, it had really been shifting towards the Republican Party. But remember, it wasn't that long ago that you had Democrats in the Senate from Florida win by 13, 14 percentage points. It was only a decade ago that you had a Democrat, Bill Nelson, who is a very relatively speaking popular senator from the state of Florida. So it's like, yes, has it been shifting to the right since 2000? But it was not until Ron DeSantis came around and really cemented the conservative movement in Florida. He really did. He was able to capture that movement in Florida and turn it into a huge victory. Like we said, going from a state that voted, and look at this, even Scott barely won, barely beat Bill Nelson in 2018. And now he's one of the most popular senators in the state, or in the country. And his name was being thrown out there to be majority leader. So, really big changes. But getting back to Ron DeSantis, before he was the governor, he was a U.S. representative from Florida's 6th congressional district. And I believe that is also the district that was represented by Mike Waltz. Let's look at this. I think that was, yep. So that same district that Trump won by 33 percentage points. But he was a former representative until 2018 when he eventually ran for governor. He went to Harvard Law School, and he was in the Navy and served in Iraq. Now, he is known for his very conservative stances when it comes to education, public health, and immigration, and gained a lot of prominence for his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, really emphasizing personal freedoms, putting personal freedoms above everything. At the end of the day, the government can't, personal freedoms outweigh everything. You have God-given rights that cannot be taken away from you. He opposed lockdowns heavily. And there was a lot of people in the conservative movement who loved the way he handled the COVID pandemic. They loved it. In 2024, he did run for president. He ran for the Republican nomination, but ended up suspending his campaign after underperforming pretty badly. And here's the reality. Ron DeSantis appeals to the same voters that vote for Donald Trump. So it made sense why it just wasn't going to work out. And maybe was it a good idea in theory? Sure. But in reality, it was a terrible idea. This was a terrible idea that set Ron DeSantis back in the Republican Party. There's a lot of people who, you want to talk about Trump derangement syndrome, who have DeSantis derangement syndrome. They just can't get over the fact that he tried to challenge Trump in 24. But do they hold anyone else to that standard? Do they hold Vivek to that standard? Do they hold Tim Scott to that standard? No. They just hate Ron DeSantis for some reason, which makes absolutely no sense because he is the most successful conservative governor in America. He is America's governor right now. And there is no doubt about that. There is no one better than Ron DeSantis. There just isn't. Now, granted, his 24 campaign did hurt him, but it also left him with roughly like $10 million in the bank. $10 million in the bank post 2024. So, obviously, he's got a lot here. He's got a lot to work with here. And let's see if they have any numbers. Let's see, financials, fundraising, let's see. And of course, he's going to have some, what would you say? He's going to have these other big donors and these big organizations, political organizations, they're going to push for him. But supposedly, let's see, he had raised, I think he had about $10 million cash on hand when he suspended his campaign, which could give him a lot of cash to get started in 2028 if he wants to jump in the race. And I think that's what he's going to do. He's term limited as governor of Florida. He's term limited after 2 years in 2026. And I definitely believe he has aspirations for the next level. And I'm very excited, really, really excited to see what happens. It's like it will be a lot of fun to see him jump in this race and what he can do. And he's got a lot of strengths going into this race. As governor, he implemented policies that resonate with a lot of conservative voters. Education reforms, huge tax reform. And he demonstrated that he can fundraise. He had huge fundraising skills during his gubernatorial and presidential campaign. There was a lot of donors behind the scene that were pushing for DeSantis to run in 2024. Now, and I think he can recover from it. Don't get me wrong. I don't think this is, he's all of a sudden indebted forever. But did it hurt him? Yes. We can't lie about that. It did hurt him. But he demonstrated ultimately, even though it hurt him, that he can fundraise like there's no tomorrow. And he still maintains, even post-2024 election, he maintains a super high profile, media profile through frequent media appearances, policy announcements. He holds a lot of press conferences. He's really getting out in front of the media all of the time. But we know that although 24, when it comes to cash, may be an advantage, 24, when it came to inside of the actual party and his electability, it definitely hurt him. When he exited from the 2024 presidential race, many could perceive that as just he's not electable. But I think it was more like he's just not electable while Trump is still on the ballot. I think he would be much more electable if Trump was not on the ballot. And we saw how it affected his and Trump's relationship, where Trump was just consistently attacking him for, like a year and a half. And it's been difficult to navigate that position, with the current president, balancing between aligning with Trump and his base, but also establishing his own identity, which I think he was doing a good job with until 24, when he really had to lean in to that Trump base if he wanted to win, and it alienated a lot of people. But also, I think he does need to broaden his appeal beyond the conservative base, especially if he's going to run in a general election, if he wants to widen the electorate. You need to sew together a bigger electorate, a bigger constituency or coalition of constituents to elect yourself. But ultimately, I think he is very, very well positioned. And he's very active. He's maintained a lot of political relevance post-2024. And put a lot of signal that he's interested in 2028 running for president, and continued his focus on national issues and big policy initiatives that keep him in the national conversation leading into 2028. And so now this is going to bring us to our next candidate, number 3, top 3 Republicans who could be president in 2028, and that will be Mr. Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio, obviously the current Secretary of State. He's a former senator from Florida. I believe he got a law degree from the University of Miami. Law degree from the University of Miami. And he did run for president in 2016. And that really put him at odds with Trump for the campaign in 2016, but ultimately was able to become one of the Trump administration's closest allies in the Senate during his first term. No doubt about that. And as Secretary of State, Rubio has been at the forefront of really the international diplomacy when it comes to Panama, Canada, China, Ukraine, Russia. And has and with over a decade in the Senate, has a very comprehensive understanding of domestic and foreign policy. I think he's a very intelligent, smart person. And I think he's very articulate, and he's the future of the party. Not only does he sound like, but he also looks like the future of the party. The future of the party is becoming a lot less white. We are bringing a lot more minorities into the fold. I believe Rubio is of Cuban descent, and to be honest with you, that is the future of the party. That is the future of the Republican Party, is more Hispanic. It's just as simple. And he's very articulate. The guy is very articulate, and he has very broad appeal. He is probably the more establishment candidate that I would be comfortable with. Not okay with like a Nikki Haley. I'm not. Marco Rubio is about my limit on where I would go on a more establishment candidate, because I think he can appeal to a much more moderate and a larger coalition of voters. It just has broader appeal. He's been able to position himself as a bridge between, establishment Republicans and more conservative factions of the party. And I think he's played it very, very well. And he brings diversity to the ticket, which, like we said, Hispanic voters are already shifting to the Republican Party. If you had a Hispanic at the top of the ticket, I think you would attract even more Hispanic voters into the party. And like we said, when it comes to the actual depth of his knowledge, when it comes to the policy, he understands the nuance, complexity of different issues, from immigration to national security to foreign policy, all these different things that are going on. He has shown time and time again that he has a very very deep understanding of the issues. But he does have some challenges. And it's like, he ran against Trump in 2016, which I think that's kind of the past history now, but I think there are some people who may still hold on to that. But ultimately, I think it's I don't want to say ancient history, but it kind of is. I think the bigger issue he's going to need to deal with is the establishment image from some people on the right. He's going to face a lot of skepticism from more of the populist wing of the party due to his really long-standing ties, I guess, with the GOP establishment. Like, he may be a bridge politician, but I think you can say he's definitely much more on the establishment side than he is on the more populist side, which in itself isn't a terrible thing. It just comes down to how does he govern, what are his policies at the end of the day, but he is going to need to navigate the shift in priorities and sentiment within the Republican Party that's going away from the establishment. And I think he's a smart guy, and I think if that's the direction the country and the party starts to go, he is going to continue he's going to continue to go that way. No doubt about it. But he is more establishment than some Republicans would be comfortable with. But although I view as his really extensive experience, both in a legislative position, an executive branch position, it really lines him up as a seasoned candidate. He has good understanding of foreign policy. With his, you couple that with his communication skills and appeal to voters that are really seeking that are seeking a knowledgeable candidate. I think he plays that role. I think he could be a very viable candidate in a general election in 2028. And now that will move us on to kind of more of a wild card. Some people may not see this coming. But the number 4 of the top 4 Republicans who could be president in 2028 is Glenn Youngkin. Glenn Youngkin, he is the current governor of Virginia. He was elected back in 2022, and he was previously the CEO or co-CEO of the Carlyle Group, which is a global investment firm that has about $500 billion in assets under management. So he resigned as the co-CEO of the Carlyle Group to run for the governor's race in 2020. He did it in 2020, but he became governor, I think it was 2021 was when he was elected. And he was able to appeal to a much, much broader coalition of voters in a left-leaning state. And he really leaned on the fact that, how would we say this? He leaned a lot into parental rights. That was the big thing. It was this education-focused policy initiative that got him elected. When you had a lot of Democrats coming and saying that, no, you don't have control over your children and what they do. We're going to shut down your schools. We're going to mandate that your child get vaccinated. We're going to mandate that they have masks in the classroom. So, obviously that was what he ran on and was able to win. He was able to win on that. He positioned himself as a center-right Republican who focused on immigration reform, economic growth, and parental rights. And he won the Virginia governorship in 2021, which is a huge achievement in a state that has leaned Democrat for years. This is a state that has leaned Democrat for years. When was the last time that Virginia, I think during Bush, did they vote for a Republican? Yeah, look at this. 2004 was the last time Virginia voted for a Republican. Before that, the last time they had a governor that was a Republican. Let's see, how far do we got to go back? Okay, we have to go back to probably, one more. There we go. Bob McDonnell. He was last, 2009. That was the last time a Republican. That was almost a decade ago when he was elected. Now we're almost a decade and a half ago was the last time a Republican was elected to the governorship in Virginia. But ultimately, this has become a very strong blue seat. Voted for Harris by 6 points, voted for Biden by 10 points, voted for Clinton by 5 points, voted for Obama by 4, voted for Obama by 6. Pretty good victories. Meanwhile, at the same time, we saw that they've elected very, very liberal senators. You have Tim Kaine, who is Hillary Clinton's running mate. Then you also have Mark Warner, who's won some pretty big elections. No doubt about it. It's like some pretty large elections he has won in. But ultimately, Glenn Youngkin was able to leverage his private sector experience to promote fiscal responsibility and job creation. And he also has this great strength called the ability to self-fund. He spent at least $5.5 million of his own money in his primary campaign in 2021. That is huge in the Republican Party to be able to self-fund. For the last 12 years, we have had a nominee who could self-fund, who self-funded in 2016 and built this political machine where he didn't have to self-fund as much in 24 and 2020. And we know Youngkin went on to beat former governor, I don't know how to say his last name, Terry McAuliffe, who had previously been the governor from 2014 to 2018. But we saw he was able to go in, run on a very strong education, economic growth, and parental rights campaign and win. And win by a decent amount too. Like it was, let's look and see what it was in 21. He won the state by 2 percentage points. Remember, this is a state that just a year earlier had voted for Biden by 10 points. A 12-point swing we're looking at here. A 12-point swing. But obviously, Glenn Youngkin has a huge appeal somewhere that a lot of Republicans are struggling with. Suburban voters. His moderate stances and focus on education really resonate with suburban voters in those constituencies. That is what they value, especially white women in the suburbs. They care about their child's education. That they care about. That's how you can energize them to get out to vote. You're not going to energize that to get them out to vote when you're talking about being pro-life. You're just not. I may be pro-life. Great. But at the end of the day, you are not going to appeal to those voters by running on issues that they don't support. You have to appeal to them where they're at. Education, economic growth, parental rights. That's what they're all about. And we know he demonstrated huge fundraising skills during his gubernatorial election, and his more non-traditional outsider status or background in politics is very attractive to voters right now. That is very much in right now, is being an outsider, a non-traditional candidate. That's huge. But ultimately, he does have some limitations in the fact that he doesn't have as much political experience. He only has a few years in public office. And he may face scrutiny over the fact if he's ready to be president. And he is definitely a lesser known candidate. He's probably the least known candidate here on the national stage compared to these other potential candidates like Rubio or DeSantis or Vance. And he has to be able to balance his more moderate views with the more conservative elements of the GOP. You know, we talk about it a lot. Like a moderate Democrat running in the progressive left, pulling them to the left. Well, the same thing occurs in the Republican Party. Are they going to try to pull him to the right in the primary? Could that hurt him in the general election? Is he going to be able to get enough voters to come out and vote for him to look at him as an electable candidate? And especially when you're seeing that Republicans, by and far, according to recent polling, that they care more about policy purity and policy agreement over electability. They would rather have a candidate who is more closely aligned on policy, but maybe they're not, their chances of getting elected are lower, versus someone whose chances of getting elected are higher, but maybe they disagree on a few more things than the other candidate, which I think is a pretty big mistake. I think there are some non-negotiables, but when it comes to things that are negotiable, I think that is a terrible way to go about it. That could be part of the downfall of the GOP going forward, if that's how they decide to go about this. If they decide that policy purity is more important than electability. Because you know what policy purity is without electability? You sitting at home on your couch twiddling your thumbs watching Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, watching the other party govern. That's what policy purity is without electability. You're sitting at home twiddling your thumbs with nothing. You have no power, you have no say, you have no vote, you got nothing. Nada. You're sitting on your ass, unemployed, at home. But I like Youngkin at the end of the day because his blend of business experience, political success, and a very competitive, lean Democrat state really positions him as a compelling candidate. He's got a compelling story to tell and his ability to attract more moderate, independent voters. So this could be a good way. You know, we talk about a lot about how is the Republican Party going to deal with low propensity voters not turning out for the Republican Party when Trump is not on the ballot. We talk about this a lot. What is the solution to this? Okay, Youngkin could be a solution to it. Obviously, it's not turning out more low propensity voters. Obviously, hopefully we can turn out as many as possible, but it's really turning to more of the moderate and independent voters that could be very advantageous in a general election when you aren't vying for those lower propensity voters. It depends. Who are you going to get elected? And really, it could solidify his candidacy. And he will need to increase his national profile, no doubt, and articulate a clear vision for what he wants to do for the future, no doubt. But he's term limited here in a couple years. He's going to have plenty of time on his hands to build a national profile, going on national TV shows, going on national podcasts to elevate his profile. So I think he could be a very formidable candidate and a good, a good prescription to the issue of low propensity voters not showing up when Trump isn't on the ballot. So that is going to wrap things up for today. Those are my top 4 Republicans who could be president in 2028. That's going to wrap things up for today, folks. Let me know your thoughts down below. Is there anybody else you think should be in this list? Is there someone you'd rank higher? Would you put the different people in order? I went Vance, DeSantis, Rubio, Youngkin. Would you put it in a different order? Who are your top 4? Let me know in the thoughts down below. And as always, smash that subscribe button. Make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future. And we will catch you next time.